In 1960, a teenage boy who had dreams of becoming a writer went to sea over the bridge with his uncle, a shipwright. For the boy, it was the first time he had seen characters from his own community, working-class men and women from Belfast, on the stage. In later life, he said it was as if he had been thrust in front of a mirror for the first time, and he was both scared and delighted by what he saw. Witnessing the power of theatre in showing the two faces of Belfast working-class life, ugly and violent, and civilised and decent, was a life-changing experience. The boy, Stewart Parker, would eventually become one of Northern Ireland's most lauded and visionary playwrights of the 1970s and 1980s. And the mirror he held up to Belfast reflected an image of the city that was provocative, witty, honest, and hopeful during some of its grimmest years. Parker spent his early childhood here in Sydenham. As an adult, he remembered the trains to and from Bangor rattling past at the end of the street. And beyond the tracks rose the inevitable gantries of Queen's Island. 3 sounds were constantly in the air. There was the industrial noise, the distant clanging of the shipyard, and the sudden roar from the aircraft testing at Shorts. George, tell me what it was like growing up to have Stewart Parker as a brother.
He had lovely blue eyes and really blonde hair, and we all mollycoddled him because he wasn't well and he couldn't come out that much, so we played indoors with him, colouring in, snakes and ladders, stuff like that. He had terrific lung problems. He was called delicate in those days. He's a delicate child.
When did you realise that Stewart was a writer?
But he told me he was going to be a writer, you see. I says, well, what's your future? What are you going to do? I'm going to be a writer. And if you read that little poem there, you'll see what I mean about that. This poem is titled, I Will Write. Though soft sleep tempts my leaden eyes to warmth and comfort, or fills this pen with rock, though trend or temper robs me of my everything, till all but pen and paper stay, and them they'll never have, I say, though the weird masters, time and age, make the body an abhorrence, pouring senile liquid through the brain, turning the hair white, still I will write.
And he was going to be a writer?
Yes. He wrote the original in 1957, so it was 15, 16, and then he revised it in May 1958. So that was way early on, before he really seriously started to write.
How did you and your parents feel about somebody who was moving away from the kind of traditional route the family took?
My father said the usual thing to Stewart. When Stewart said he was going to write, my father sort of said, well, that'll do you to get a proper job, son. I'm happy with that. I think that's pretty typical of working class fathers whose sons elevate themselves in the literature and stuff like that,
Unlike his predecessors, Thomas Carnduff and Sam Thompson, Parker wasn't destined for the shipyards. After the Second World War, there were a lot of university grants and places available for smart teenagers from a working-class background. Parker seized the opportunity with both hands and came here, to the Queen's University of Belfast. Queen's was a revelation for Parker. He became involved in the Drama Society, writing and appearing in reviews for the first Queen's Festival. He wrote and published poetry and acquired the education that enabled him to travel and work in America as a tutor for 5 years after university. However, in August 1969, Parker returned home to a radically different city. He recalled later how, after a long, slow simmer, the place exploded the very week I came back. Barricades in the streets, gutted buildings, the army everywhere, and then gunfire at night. Parker's relationship with the city of his birth would become a constant theme throughout his work for radio, stage and screen. He confessed to a love-hate relationship with Belfast, but it was also, as a friend of Parker's said, the live wire that electrified his writing. And like his predecessors, Irvine, Carnduff and Thompson, Stewart Parker returned to the industrial heritage of East Belfast. But his take on the Titanic story with his radio play, The Iceberg, was not like anything anyone had ever heard before.
At least they could have put us in the table of statistics. SS Titanic. Length overall 882 feet 9 inches. Gross tonnage 46,328. Passenger capacity 2,440. Crew 860. Workers killed during construction 17.
The two main characters in The Iceberg, Hughie and Danny, are ghosts who died while building Titanic. Nevertheless, they join the passengers on board the maiden voyage. Their ghostly status gives them freedom to roam the ship, and they weave in and out of first class, third class, the boiler room, and even briefly join Thomas Andrews, the chief designer of Titanic. The exchanges between Hughie and Danny are witty and eloquent, expressed as they are in the vernacular of East Belfast. But they serve a greater purpose, to address the bigger issues of the day, things like social injustice and home rule, and ultimately to remind the audience that the deaths of two humble workmen are just as important as the deaths of the world's wealthiest men. After writing The Iceberg, broadcast on BBC Radio Ulster in 1975, Parker fully committed himself to drama. He gave himself an even greater challenge for his next project, a stage play that would use the humble bicycle as a symbol that could potentially unite the divided city of Belfast.
I realised it was going to be difficult to write a play set in contemporary Belfast, which would take account of the last 50, 60, 70 years of history there. And I was searching around for some kind of unifying image, really. And I just came up with bicycles.
The Evolution of the Bicycle. An illustrated lecture.
Spoke Song is set in a rundown Belfast bicycle shop, inspired by Stone's bicycle shop, which once stood on Crummock Square. The main character, Frank Stock, is a good-hearted shop owner who's under threat from developers, paramilitaries, and his prodigal brother Julian, who is a rival for love interest, Daisy.
And then came the internal combustion engine.
Stewart was so far ahead of his time. In 1975, in the bicycle shop, he gives Frank Stock these words: "Something more is needed. Imagine a fleet of civic bikes, gleaming with the city's coat of arms, stacked on covered racks on every street, which anybody can ride anywhere, free of charge inside the city centre. The air clean, the people healthy, the time saved, the energy conserved. Earth would not have anything to show more fair." Spoke Song offers up a glimmer of hope in a time of gloom and despair. It catapulted Parker into the limelight, and he was awarded the prestigious Evening Standard Most Promising Playwright Award. Stewart Parker really excites me. I was lucky enough to meet the man and be in his plays, and he brought an exciting, fresh, new approach, like new paint. He had ghosts in his plays, he had flashbacks, he had music and song and dance and bicycles. Parker had been deeply affected by his discovery of radical Presbyterianism in 1790s Belfast. It connected with his belief that his own heritage was much more complex than simply being a Protestant from a largely unionist area of East Belfast. He said that The ancestral wraiths at my elbow are, amongst other things, Scots-Irish, Northern English, immigrant Huguenot, in short, the usual Belfast mongrel crew.
It must be understood there is no vendetta against the Orange Society. It's true that many lodges have been formed into companies of yeomanry by the landlords. They will be sent against us, just as the Catholic militia are. But all these men are the gulls of history.
In his highly acclaimed play Northern Star, Parker delves into the history of the United Irishman Henry Joy McCracken, one of the Belfast Presbyterians who brought together Protestants and Catholics in a rising against British rule in 1798.
It is set in a crumbling cottage on Cave Hill in the aftermath of the failed rising, just before McCracken is captured and hung. Throughout, the character of McCracken alternately mourns and rages against Belfast's lost opportunity of unity between Protestant and Catholic. We can't love it for what it is, only for what it might have been. If we had got it right, if we had made it whole, if. It's a ghost town now, and always will be. Angry and implacable ghosts. Me condemned to be one of their number. We never made a nation. Our brainchild, stillborn, our own fault. We botched the birth. So what if the English do bequeath us to one another someday? What then? When there's nobody else to blame except ourselves.
Parker died tragically young in 1988 after contracting stomach cancer. He was at the height of his creativity, and there's no doubt that he had many more plays inside him. But nevertheless, in his relatively short career, he managed to hold a mirror up to Belfast, one that showed the city in all its glorious variety and contradictions.